Good morning, gentlemen. As I sit here recording at the moment, it is currently Saturday morning, and I do have a bit of sad news to relay to you. Kenny Rogers has recently passed on. The gambler himself, the man who knew when to hold 'em, knew when to fold 'em, knew when to walk away, and knew when to run. As we may recall from our very beginning sections together, this is what the game of life is all about. He taught us about the strategy of life, and we remember him always for his immortal wisdom. And now, today, we are going to continue to live out that wisdom and devise our own strategy in the sacrament of marriage and in the vocation of matrimony as we look at what does it mean to be married. Last time, we discussed the basic order that exists in the universe. And one of the things that we noted was it is not good for man to be alone. John Paul II sees a number of great moral truths that arise from Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. It is not good for man to be alone, being among the most fundamental. Now, this doesn't necessarily need to mean marriage. Philia, storge, and agape are all part of this as well. But eros is certainly a part of that. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to take a look at matrimony and the sacrament of marriage in light of some of the things that we have seen from the last unit. And in particular, some of the things that we should remember is, first of all, there is an order to the created world. And that secondly, this order is a good order. Rather than simply seeing spiritual things as good, material things as bad, we look at the natural world, we look at the created world, we look at our own bodies and the systems that exist within our bodies, and along with God in Genesis 1, we declare it is good. And if it is good, then that means it is something that we should be trying to preserve and seek after with all of our efforts. So, with that in mind, let's begin to take a look at the marriage and matrimony in general and see how it is that we can smash our loneliness in part through marriage. Marriage, as the vicar noted in The Princess Bride, is what brings us together today. It's what brings two people together, and it's what brings us as a class, in a much more metaphorical sense, together. The Princess Bride, incidentally, one of the greatest love stories you'll ever see. If you haven't seen that movie, treat yourself. As we look at marriage, one of the things that C.S. Lewis observed about eros is that healthy eros leads to sexual desire. It's not that we have sexual desire first and then eros. And this makes a certain amount of sense. Eros begins by seeing the whole person. Sexual desire only sees a person as, here's a slab of meat, here's someone who can satisfy an itch that I've got to scratch. And so if we are seeing the whole person, we see that individual, we contemplate the beauty of that other person and say, I wish to be a part of that which I see. And that naturally leads to a healthy form of sexual desire for the other person. And so as we consider marriage and we consider eros, which exists within marriage, one of the things we have to ask ourselves is, what is the role of sexual desire then within human existence? And since everything in creation is good, we should say that the order that we observe in our sexual desires and in human sexuality can have a certain normative value. And when we say normative value, meaning it sets the standards that we ought to follow. These are the norms, these are the rules, because in doing this, we fulfill the purpose of our creation. The question then becomes, what is the telos? What is the final cause of human sexuality? When do we get to the point at which we can say human sexuality has fulfilled its purpose? Its goodness is being maximized. Sexuality is a good thing, we affirm with Genesis 1. And so what does it look like when it is at its most good? There are two purposes that human sexuality fulfills. There is a unitive dimension and there's a procreative dimension. With the unitive dimension, we can see this in certain obvious ways. Of course, two people are physically coming together. But when we talk about the unitive element, it really is much deeper than that. Remember, one of the things that we observed in the last class was the physical element is indeed a part of us, but we should not just be reduced to that. So there is that physical bonding. And that physical bonding goes much deeper than mere proximity. In sexual climax, for instance, there are a number of brain chemicals that are going around. One of the big ones is oxytocin, sometimes also known as the love drug or love potion number 9. Oxytocin is a neurotransmitter, a neurochemical that dumps itself in many ways uh, at particular moments. So it produces feelings of closeness with the other person, and there are particular moments. So, above all, when a mother is nursing her child, for instance, she has a great feeling of oxytocin, or the brain releases a substantial amount of oxytocin to promote bonding. Likewise, at sexual climax, both partners have a substantial release of oxytocin in the brain. With this unitive element, this oxytocin brings about a substantial bonding on a very deep and emotional level, so that we cannot really ignore the fact that one person has sex with another person, as sexual intercourse occurs, a substantial bonding comes about. In addition to which, there is also the much more obvious procreative element, that if everything is working properly, the result of sex is a child. It's the reproductive system, after all. Sperm and egg meet, and from there, children occur, if everything is working correctly. Sometimes things aren't, and sometimes it's nobody's fault. But if things are working properly, the unitive and the procreative aspects are ultimately the purpose of human sexuality. These are the things that sexuality brings about. Marriage, then, has a particular role with human sexuality. Aristotle, remember, is going to say that something is virtuous if it's at the right time, to the right degree, towards the right person, for the right reasons, all of the rest. The question then becomes, how can we have human sexuality be a virtuous thing? Marriage is the answer. Marriage is the institution which regulates human sexuality so that it may fulfill its purpose. How do we know whether or not we should engage in sexual activities? Well, is this person the individual that we're married to? Marriage allows for this to occur because marriage has a permanent bond, which allows the unitive element to truly occur. If we get into the habit of ignoring ourselves, of ignoring our very bodies and their unitive dimension in, let's say, the hookup culture, or in a bond which is maybe permanent for tonight or permanent for the next few weeks, but not something that's really and truly lifelong, we're going to dull the edge. We're going to reduce the effectiveness of the unitive dimension of human sexuality. Likewise, the institution of marriage is able to allow the procreative element to really come forth, because if a person has a child and they are the sole caregiver, this can really be a terrifying prospect. Marriage allows sexuality to occur without fear of having children. And should children occur within sexual expression, marriage is there to say, you're not going to be the one stuck with the check. You will not be alone as you raise this child. And it's good for the child as well. It's very natural for children to want to know, where did I come from? Who are the people that loved me into existence? Marriage gives that child the stable context they need in order to truly flourish. Everything about human sexuality can be properly regulated by marriage so that human sexuality is able to become absolutely everything that it can be. And this, remember, is ultimately the question when we are talking about the fullness of a good thing. How can we maximize every good that is part of it? Marriage is the only thing which allows human sexuality to truly and fully be everything that it is supposed to be, to truly and fully realize every good that can come about through human sexuality. When we talk about marriage and talk about human sexuality, and especially that unitive dimension, this is not a Christian invention at all. Marriage and sexuality, when we talk about sex, ultimately the word sex is from the Latin word secare, which means to cut or to separate. The two sexes are something that have been separated from one another. We can also see this in words like sacred, which is something that is set apart. The two sexes, male and female, are separated. Sexual intercourse is that which reunites the sexes. And again, this is far from a Christian invention. Plato's Symposium, for instance, the great work on love that Plato wrote with the help of Socrates. Socrates as basically Plato's mouthpiece. There is a point in Plato's Symposium when they talk about the myth of the hermaphroditic individuals, the individuals who were joined together at the back. You can see down there at the image below. Once upon a time, so goes the legend in the symposium, all human beings were this. They were a man on one side, a female on the other side, and joined at the back. But human beings had a revolution. They tried to revolt against Zeus, and Zeus does what Zeus does best, struck down thunderbolts and separated men from women. That way, human beings would be weakened and unable to further have revolts against Zeus. And so one of the things that we recognize, one of the things that the symposium recognizes, is that when a man and a woman come back together in sexual intercourse, we are reuniting something that had been separated. Likewise, in Genesis 2, we see God putting Adam into a great sleep and then taking from Adam's rib, forming from Adam's rib the woman, Eve. Eve emerges from Adam's rib so that a part of Adam had originally been taken away so that Adam would have this suitable helpmate. The woman and the man need one another. Woman without man is alone, man without woman is alone. Something that has been separated is once again reunited. This is ultimately what sexuality and what sexual expression does. A reunion between separated parts is brought about. One of the things that we say then is that the two sexes complement and complete each other, just as the donut hole completes the donut in a certain sense. And when we think about the way that men operate and the way that women operate, we can sort of see, yeah, we do in fact need each other. Men without women can sometimes be brutish and violent. Women without men, there's a nurturing aspect that goes on. Women and men need one another. The stereotypes can certainly be overblown, to be sure, but they do come from some basic truths about the personalities of men and the personalities of women. And we would do well to not just reduce men and women to these stereotypes, but the fact remains, men and women do need each other in some very important ways. And there are some significant ways, in addition to the biological realities, where men and women complete each other. In marriage, this completion is made lifelong. It is able to form the natural basis for raising a family. And we see here two wonderful images. Mary and Joseph being united by one of the high priests in the temple, by one of the priests in the temple. And there, likewise, a medieval image of a man and woman being brought together before the bishop, the new high priest, as we will discuss in Unit 4. This is ultimately what marriage is all about. The completion and the reuniting of two halves and making something whole again. Finally, we have to talk about the importance of the body. Marriage is all about bringing two complementary bodies together with one another, a male body and a female body. And one of the things that we do indeed see from Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 is that the body is important. The body is a part of who we are. Genesis 1 has God creating who we are out of the clay of the earth and then breathing his breath, his ruah, his spirit into that body so that we have a foot in both worlds. We have a foot in the spiritual realm through the breath of God and the foot in the material realm through the clay that we were made of. The body never ever ceases to be an important part of who we are. And this is one of the reasons for the incarnation, for instance. Why the Word didn't just come down, the second person of the Trinity didn't just come down and say, okay, everybody, here I am, an immaterial God, everybody now worship me. The importance of the incarnation is the importance of the body. Because, as Aquinas notes, there is nothing in the intellect which is not first in the senses. We are going to beat that dead horse all the way from now until April 30th. Remember that statement. The incarnation fundamentally reminds us of the importance of the body. And if it is true on a theological level that there is nothing in the intellect that is not first in the senses, that we learn through our senses, we learn through our bodies, we are material beings, as Aquinas notes. We learn in material ways. The ultimate result may be a spiritual knowledge, but the beginning is very much a spiritual knowledge. Then we have to say, language. There is an importance of the language of the body and an importance of truth. When John Paul II talks about the theology of the body, he devotes great attention to the language of the body, the way in which we communicate not merely with our words, not merely with written down truths, but our very physicality communicates certain realities. Body language and nonverbal communication is absolutely important. A friend of mine, for instance, once illustrated the importance of language of the body by recalling an incident where she was being bullied a little bit at the age of 3. Her mother then goes up to her bullies, gives them a big hug, a very loving action, and then says, "Touch my daughter again and I'll kill you." This was shocking to those children. And one of the reasons why it was so shocking was a disconnect between what the body was saying and what the words were communicating. Our bodies communicate something. And if we try and communicate something like by trying to give a big old hug to somebody, a loving thing, and then we actually communicate something else, there's a disconnect. There's a lack of truth. Remember, truth is when ideas in the mind correspond with what's in reality. True words, we can say then, are when the words that we say correspond with what's in reality. If I say, for instance, "I am not a material being," there is no truth in my statement. It is, in the best circumstances, it's a mistake. Worst case scenario, it's a lie. Bodies likewise communicate. And what we want to make sure of is that our bodies are speaking the truth. In sexuality, the body is communicating quite a few things. One of the most important is the body is a gift. I am making my body into a gift for you. You are making your body into a gift for me. And fundamentally, there is the unitive dimension. I am yours and you are mine, and we have been united. What we say in, let's say, a hookup culture, for instance, is, "I'm yours, but just for now." Or, "I'm yours, but maybe not really." And what we can see in contraception and other things as well is either you have a physical declaration of, "I am not fully yours," as for instance with physical prophylactics, when we are physically withholding a part of ourselves from the other, or in other chemical means, we are, in a sense, we are damaging and destroying parts of our bodies, even if temporarily, so that we are not giving the fullness of ourselves to that individual. So that the Catholic Church is going to say, in the hookup culture and in promiscuity and in various other things that are sins against chastity and sins against matrimony, one of the important things is that the Catholic Church is saying is, this does not communicate truth. This is not being truthful with the language of the body. And what we want to be above all is truthful. Jesus himself is truth. He is the embodiment of truth. And we imitate Jesus at our best when we too are embodiments of truth. When we engage in the physical act of love, as with any other occasion, we always want to be the embodiment of truth. As we embody the truth of both the unitive and the procreative dimensions of human sexuality, expressing this by the very fiber and foundation of who we are in a physical way, not just a verbal or a spiritual way, one of the natural results then is going to be children. And that's going to be the subject of our next unit, of our next discussion, when we talk about matrimony and the natural outgrowth of matrimony, children. For now, that will do it for today. And remember, along with Kenny Rogers, know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away, and know when to run. Have a good day, gentlemen.